The Hill Country Wine Cave is arguably one of my most fleshed out productions that I've ever done. And so we're going to walk through the behind the scenes of how everything came to be within the final edit. Before we shoot, before we even get onto site, the first thing that we're doing is research. We're learning anything and everything about the Wine Cave, about Brian, about Cam, the two project designers that we interviewed. And we're really trying to just gather as much information because it allows us to ask better questions. When we ask better questions, we get better answers and more emotional answers from people. And so we deep dive every single article that's been published about this project, every single interview done 20 years ago about Brian when he was in college. Like, we looked at everything. And what we kind of pulled from all of this are the main sticking points of the Wine Cave. The three things about the winery is it's in a cave. That's the coolest thing ever. The whole ship in a bottle idea that they were thinking about when putting this together. And then it's also one with nature, which is a really big through line with Clayton Court and all their work. So we put together these interview questions that are meant to draw out these story beats and to give them space to really kind of talk about the things that excite them about the project that maybe are a little bit more underneath the surface. And so we shoot the interview, it's fantastic, and then we end up with this. It is about 2 hours worth of footage, 1 hour from Brian and 1 hour from Cam. And it's a lot to go through. And the first thing we do is we organize it. What's green is good, what's blue is better, purple is great, and orange is we have to include this.
And on the other hand, there's a value set that's kind of poetic, right? It's how do we go beyond the ordinary? How do we transcend mundane utility and bring real beauty and value to a space?
All this is super subjective. It's just like what sounds, what feels good. But through all of the research that we've done, through our intuition in doing this for many years, like, we understand like what's good and what we're kind of going after. And it's an emotional thing. It's a feel. So when we're going through all of this, something that I'm keeping in mind is the worst stories are told this happened and then this happened and then this happened. It's like one of the South Park writers talk about, like, you need but and therefore story beats. You need this happened, but we did this. There was water in the bottom of the cave, therefore we had to design the structure in a certain way to get rid of that. Architects have a tendency when they're writing their award submissions to kind of make it a to-do list of like, we did this and then we did this and then we did this. It's a little bit boring, it's a little bit prescriptive, and it's not emotional. There's no like engagement to telling a story that way. We want cause and effect, we want reaction, we want purpose and reason to drive all these design moves and all of our story beats. And so once we go through all of that, we start to kind of lay out the foundation. The main points of the foundation are hook, overview, introduction, design point 1, design point 2, design point 3, close out. Super easy on paper, but actually getting there is so hard.
This project kind of embodies the true nature of quiet architecture.
The question I always ask architects is, in 2 sentences, describe this project. And what they usually come up with is really good. And that kind of gives us a way to tell people in the first 30 seconds what this video is about, what this project is about, get them interested, and then continue to feed that. And then on the introduction,
when we came out, they had excavated to about 70 feet deep.
There is an hour and a half I could have put together about just the cave's history. The background of the client, why they decided to dig a cave in the first place, but that's not the point of this video. And we really had to kind of cull that down to a really short, succinct amount of time, which is super hard to do because you want to be able to elaborate all these things. But doing it this way, it gives us enough context to the cave, to this is what it's about. And then it presents us an opportunity to showcase the problem.
The floor was below the floodplain and the cave was full of water, like about 14 inches of water.
And so this goes back to our but therefore story beats, right? When we came out, here's all the issues we were having. Therefore, and we get to address this later, this is how we designed solutions to that. This is how we worked around these constrictions. And then once you have the hook, the introduction, we want to be able to kind of transition into them talking about the actual project itself, what they actually did. And so we need to create a transition point.
The project themselves, they wouldn't need us. We're the kind of instrument, the tool, so to speak, to help them visualize and realize that.
It's such a good point of the clients didn't know what they were looking for. Here's all these issues. And that's why they call us. They called us because we came to not like knight in shining armor, but we're here to help them realize what they really want. So that first chunk is pretty cut and dry. And then after that is when it starts to get a little bit messy. The whole process of this, of like, when do they talk about the ship in a bottle idea? When do they talk about the materials that they chose and why they chose that? It's really throwing stuff at a wall and trying to figure out what works. Do we put them talking about the materials here and then roll it into the whole ship in a bottle context? That doesn't make sense. What if we flipped it around and tried this and tried that? It's a lot of trying and failing until you get something that feels really right.
We landed on a solution that was really simple. The program was just the essentials. The big luxury here is that there's a little bathroom.
And so now we're going into the solution that they came up with. It made sense to kind of give that a little bit of an overview. But then because we're kind of coming off of the cave history, the problems that they were running into, let's kind of touch on that. Let's touch about what they did about that.
Huge variable, which is the cave. It's a little daunting at first. Instantly, you know there's going to be some issues that have to be resolved. The cave is not a nice, smooth dimension. It's not even all the way from front to back. And so we were working with a new technology, at least a new technology available to architects, which gave us the ability to kind of laser measure everything.
And so they talk about the material being so variable and utilizing technology to really kind of measure it, which is such a key part of it. But then it allows us to transition into the whole ship in a bottle idea.
Liken the project to building a ship in a bottle. That wooden box.
And so we're looking for a way to not only start really big and start to go more and more detailed as we move on, but where are moments that we can kind of naturally start to piggyback and transition into these other sections. And so we talk about the cave, and the solution to that was being scanning. What that allowed us to do is create the ship in a bottle. By creating a ship in a bottle, we wanted to make sure that we didn't
all of that is
humanity of it. We needed to add warmth and texture and a little humanness to it, so you didn't feel like you were in this dark, dreary cave. And that allows us to roll into the material section.
It's intended to not only bring up the color temperature, right, which is really important, but elicit this kind of response to organic materials that if it's just concrete and stone, right, you're missing that kind of fundamental connection to something that was alive.
And then once we get into the material section, that allows us to roll into the lighting design, right? You have these two different elements, the wood, the cave. And so you want to light them differently to accentuate them differently.
Most of the features of the cave we wanted to accentuate, so grazing light that can hit the cave walls in a nice, elegant way.
And then we bring it full circle by kind of closing out in a more big impact.
And trying to really heighten the human experience in the spaces that we create. So when you're a guest, you have no idea what you're getting into.
So we put this together. It's a rough cut. It's down, it's dirty, but it gives the architect an idea of this is the pacing, the feel of the full video. This is the story beats that we're hitting on. You know, what do we think? And, you know, we send it over. They have notes. We kind of go through it of like what's working, what's not working. The big thing was that came back, we were missing the connection back to landscape. We had a lot of great moments about the interior, but there wasn't that kind of full circle moment of like tying it into the landscape, it being a quiet piece of architecture. And that made total sense. We bring that up in the first 30 seconds, but we don't really touch on that in the end. And so we go back, we revise it, and we make sure that we bring in a little bit more of the elaboration to the through line that kind of ties all their work together, the nature, the sites that they build on, and, you know, making sure that they're not, you know, screwing it up. So when we get about halfway through putting together the story beats, that's when we start to look at what's the music we want. Like half of the story is there. We kind of have an idea. I have an idea in my head about like tempo, how I kind of want this to feel. And I break it down, you know, in a big overview. what we want things to do is we have an introduction, we have a body, we have a closing. And so we need three separate pieces of music. They need to be of the same, but they all serve a different purpose. So with the introduction, we need this to tie into the site. We need it to be a little bit Western, a little bit country, but not so much so where anybody watching this would be like, oh, it's on a Texas Hill Country, of course. So it needs to be something subtle in the background that feels right, but it can't be, super on the nose. It also needs to be intriguing. This is the introduction. We need to get people interested and invested into this story so that they continue watching. And so you just have to feel like a little Western, a little guitar. It's very simple, it's very intriguing. And then by layering in sound effects of birds, of trees, of nature, it starts to kind of build out this really holistic introduction. And then we move into the body. Now, here, the story takes full precedence. The music can't overtake and be so much so that you're not even listening to what they're talking about. And it needs to be a little bit repetitive and have a little more movement to it. So it's kind of moving the story along and not feeling boring and redundant and like it's dragging. And so we stick with strings here. And so it has a little bit of movement and energy to it, but not so much so where it's like you can't even pay attention to anything. And then finally, with the closing, this is where we really lean into the emotion. We want the viewers to leave with an emotional souvenir. And so we really try to play into this. It's softer, it's more subtle, it plays up the impact that they're talking about the sites that they build on, about the impact that they're hoping that the guests have when they come to this space. And we do this because the introduction and the closing matter the most. The introduction, because we need people to watch it, to invest into it, and to actually watch the whole video. But then the ending, because this is the most memorable moment. They're not going to remember middle of the video. They might, but most of them, we want to leave them with an emotional souvenir. And so if we can get the architect to talk about something emotional, to talk about something impactful, and we can pair music into it to really kind of play it up, then all of a sudden it takes on a whole new life. All of a sudden we're showcasing how the built environment can impact people. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, showcasing that this is more than just a really cool building. No, this has actual tangible impacts on you, on the guest, if you come here. And that's really what we're trying to get after. And so because we have three different pieces of music, we need to be able to naturally transition between one and the other. If we have a hard transition, it becomes jarring, and then you're just paying attention to the music. If you just do a simple fade in, fade out, most of the time that's a little lazy and it just doesn't feel right. And so what we did here is we they do this a lot in music where they'll take everything away and it'll maybe just be the person singing. And then all of a sudden they'll bring all the instruments back in and it has like a really good impact and it feels good. And so we do the same thing here where we kind of take it all away and then we bring everything back in to a different song, to a different tempo, showcasing that, yes, we're moving from the exterior to the interior. We are at a new moment in the story. It feels different. So we're using the door shutting, we play into it with some sound effects, take it all away, and then we bring it back in. And we're on to the body, we're on to the meat and potatoes. And then, as I just mentioned, maybe fading in and out is a little bit lazy, but sometimes it works. Sometimes you naturally want to just have one piece of music kind of fade out, and the nice melodic closing music gets to come in, and it doesn't need to be this momentous feature. It can just be. And so we put the transition intentionally when Cam is talking, because we don't want this to be a very apparent thing, because we want you to feel naturally kind of moved from one song to the next. And so by hiding this, we're able to kind of do that without many people noticing, unless you watch it over and over and over again. Finally, B-roll footage. When you're doing photography of a space, piece of architecture, the rule of thumb is you really get one photograph per hour. And so if you have a day of shooting, you maybe have 8 to 10 really good refined shots. If I had 10 shots in a 5-minute video, it would be boring. People would click off. No one would care, regardless of how much storytelling is going on. Like, you need the visual intrigue to be there. With the wine cave, it's on a ranch, it's Texas Hill Country, it's by the river. And so we want to be able to kind of showcase these context clues. Like, we want to build the world around the wine cave because it's of the place that it is. It's more than just a beautiful, crazy piece of architecture. It's also about where it sits upon the site. If I had an hour and a half of like movie featured time to do this, I could showcase the context for 20 minutes and it would be great and I would love it. That's not realistic here. We have a 5-minute video. We need to jump into it because it needs to be the architecture, but we can't skip it. And so is there 1 or 2 really, really good shots to give us enough of a context, creating that visual intrigue of like, what is this project? What are we about to get into, right? Playing into it's hidden, it's of this site. And then we have the money shot. This is title screen. It's a wine cave, big reveal, a little bit dramatic. We love that.
You know, buildings can be subservient and quiet in the place that they are, but still carry a level of confidence about themselves and be good stewards to their context.
We want to match, you know, sometimes we don't want to be as apparent like 1-to-1, but for the most part, we want to match like what they're saying with the footage. If he's talking about this piece of architecture being quiet, being of nature, what are some shots that we can use to reinforce this, to really play into that? A lot of these dusk shots are amazing because you're able to see into the actual project, but also still see the nature and the context around it. And then that allows us to transition to the inside. So you get an idea of like the stages of the actual project. And then we pull it back out.
When we came out, they had excavated to about 70 feet deep. The floor was below the floodplain and the cave was full of water.
The beauty of video is it's multimedia. We can pull from any and every piece of media source in order to tell the story. The story is first and foremost, and whatever we need to do to enhance it and to reinforce it and to tell it the best way, we're gonna do that. Clayton Court had these amazing before photos of the cave. It starts to give you an idea of scale, of before and after, and like just dramatic transformation, I think is pretty important in terms of the storytelling to it. Like, it was a challenged piece. And they also had these 3D renderings from the Matterport that they had. So they went through and they scanned the entire cave and it created this perfect 3D model. We're playing up the story of like, this is a challenging piece of architecture to make.
Bring their wine collection kind of underground.
We discovered a more poetic version of what they wanted. You know, if the client had the ability or the skills to design the project themselves, they wouldn't need us. We're the kind of instrument, the tool, so to speak, to help them visualize and realize that.
We love using people in footage. It provides a sense of scale to the piece of architecture. It gives us a little bit of movement, right? It's video. Like, we get to do things that we're not usually allowed to do in photography, like moving person in Photoshop in every single architecture photo ever. We get to actually have the person moving through the space. So it just makes sense to include them in all this. Adds a level of interaction, a level of humanness to it. Like, architecture is meant to be experienced by human beings. So we need to showcase human beings utilizing the space to have that connection, to have that connection of like, if I show this to another architect, they're like, of course we do that. Well, it's like, well, yeah, but if I show this to my mom, who's been an ER nurse for 30 years, she needs to be able to like understand how the space moves, how it feels, and how it lives. And so how we structured the shots as soon as we kind of get into the actual space is we want to kind of showcase like how it feels first and foremost, but then also how you move it. We want to orient people in the space so it's not confusing of like, where are we? Why are we here? And so giving very clear wide shots, very clear long panning shots, kind of getting an idea of like, this is where we are.
Measure everything.
It allowed us to kind of scribe fit the insertion. I kind of always have likened the project to building a ship in a bottle. That wooden box kind of ship in a bottle.
So again, like we introduced that kind of Matterport rendering and the cave being a challenge. Now we're talking about how they're solving for that challenge. And one of the best diagrams that they produced for this cave was this axonometric, disassembly of like how the cave comes together. It's such a shame for these diagrams to never kind of come back. It just kind of lives on the project page and that's it. And people just want to see the final photos. But it's such a key part of the storytelling, the ship in a bottle idea. So I took this, we went into After Effects and we spliced out all the different elements of it. And then we animated them kind of coming together and then sliding into the actual cave itself. It is the most complex After Effects document project that I've had to create because there's so many different layerings of it. I'm super proud of this. I'm really happy how this whole thing turned out.
Most of the features of the cave we wanted to accentuate, so grazing light that can hit the cave walls in a nice, elegant.
So for the most part, we only use jump cuts. We don't do transitions. Transitions are kind of kitschy. They're a little bit trendy and they can make a video feel really dated. And we want this video to kind of be around for 5 years and still feel fresh. But we use the fade transition very sparingly and for very, very particular reasons. And so we used it here to kind of play up the lighting design transformation. So they're talking about how you have two different objects in the cave. You have the cave, you have the man-made part, and you want to light them differently because they're different elements. And then we're just fading between the two to kind of showcase and highlight that impact that it has. It's like one of the most scary things to do in a shoot is when an architect is like, hey, I want to see these shots. And you look at it and you're like you look at just this shot, it's a nothing burger. You're like, why are we shooting the lights in the cave? This makes no sense to me. But when you put it into the context of this larger story, all of a sudden this shot has quite a bit of impact. Here, let me turn on the color here. We're showcasing the wash on the wall and how you start to feel the texture of the cave come through. In and of itself, like, who cares? But when you put it into context, all of a sudden it makes a lot more sense.
Completely stealth. It doesn't need to shout for attention. It's humble, but it feels like you can't imagine it not being here.
We always end with night shots. It's, everything kind of leading to this moment. These are my favorite shots to do. They're very moody. It's this kind of grand finale and being the best shots, being really moody. We're talking about this very emotional moment of the impact that the architecture has on the people that come here. It all just kind of sings together when you do it right. There's an entire 30-minute video I could do just talking about the color grading because there's so much nuance and detail that goes into how you make a space feel how it feels in person and then maybe even enhance it a little bit. If you want to see that video, let me know. Happy to do it. It's such a extended thing to talk about. But that is how we created the Hill Country Wine Cave video. Hope you guys enjoyed.